Hi, I'm Lily Henderson, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about the topic of dementia and how to create sensory maps for patients with dementia. To start with, the definition of dementia is a group of conditions characterized by impairment of at least two brain functions, such as memory loss and judgment. This means that people with dementia can have forgetfulness, limited social skills, and thinking problems. There is currently no cure for dementia, but medication and therapies may help. That's where sensory mats come into play. Sensory mats and other sensory items may help reduce some dementia symptoms such as agitation, anxiety, and anger. To create a sensory placemat like the one I used in my Gold Award, you will need thread. It doesn't really matter what color, a sewing machine, but you can also do it by hand. A machine is faster. Needles, pins, fabric, a soft cloth placemat. I bought mine at Walmart. Ribbon, buttons, a cork, a plastic straw, a chenille washcloth. I got mine at a Dollar Tree. Scissors, and crinkly plastic or cotton stuffing. You're going to want to start by taking off the tags of anything that you bought at the store, such as your washcloth or your placemat or just anything you bought, just so that way it won't get in the way of your sewing. I always start by cutting off like the non-fuzzy side of the washcloth. So as you can see, this is already sewed on, but there is indeed one side of the washcloth that is not fuzzy and one side that is. It just makes it a little bit easier to sew on, and we always want this texture like on the nice, because sensory items. But after you cut off the back end of the washcloth, you would pin around the entire edge. And then after you pin around the entire edge, you would sew along as close as possible. While you're sewing, you need to make sure you don't get these little fuzzy parts into it, because it will break your needle and it will stop up your sewing process. So make sure you take your pins out as you go along, but you need to go around the entire edge. Don't forget to backstitch when you reach the end, and it should look kind of like a square when you're done sewing. I'm not exactly the best sewer. So after sewing on the washcloth, you would need to cut out 3 strips of fabric. I used 3 different colors of fabric. You don't have to do that. I just thought I'd make it a little cuter. So you need to make sure these 3 pieces of fabric are the exact same size. You can do rectangles. I just personally like to make them pointed at the end. I think it just adds like a little, personality to it. So after you cut out these 3 square pieces of fabric, you would need to pin them on. Make sure they are equally spaced apart. And then after you pin them on, you would need to sew them right here at the top. And then after you sew them right here at the top, don't forget to backstitch, and you would need to repeat that for all 3 of them. And then following that, you would need to sew buttons underneath them. So I typically do the buttons by hand because I don't think there's a way you can do it with the machine. So you'd need to get a traditional thread and needle. If you don't know how to sew a button, I'll leave a link in the description. But make sure you tie a knot on the back of your button so that way it does not fall off. I have knots here, as you can see. I typically put the thread through it 3 or 4 times in each hole, just to make sure that it's on there really tightly, because we obviously don't want it falling off and the dementia patient's possibly eating it or something else happening. So after you sew the buttons on, you would need to cut a tiny little hole so that way you can shove the button through. So it looks like this, and you will need to repeat that for all 3 of them, and then you have your buttons. So typically after the buttons, I did the shoelace tie, which is just something super easy. It's supposed to be like tying a shoelace. So what you would start with is you would need 2 6-inch long, 1-inch wide pieces of ribbon. So you would cut out these ribbons and you would pin them down, and then you would sew all around them like so. And after you sew them, then you would need to cut out 6 3-inch long, 1 centimeter wide pieces of ribbon. So after you cut out these 6 3-inch long, 1 centimeter wide pieces of ribbon, you would need to tack them down, you would need to loop them. They're in loops. So you need to fold them in half and then tack them down, and then you need to sew along the edge right here. Make sure you actually get them sewn, because I've had a problem where I've actually missed them, so they fall off. Don't forget to backstitch so that way they don't fall off. And then after you finish sewing on all 6 of these, then you need to cut out a 2-foot long piece of ribbon, or you could use string or rope or whatever kind of resembles or whatever can tie. You can use anything. After that, you would need to tack it at the top like so that way it doesn't fall off, because we don't want it getting lost or whatever happening to it. So after you tack it at the top, you would need to thread it through kind of like a shoelace. So it just goes back and forth, and then you can knot it at the end, and then it just, comes untied kind of like this. And then they can pull it back through like so. And then you have your shoelace tie. The next part that I typically sewed was the star, which is definitely my favorite part. I think it's super adorable, and it also crinkles, which I think is super cute and super fun. So when you're sewing the star, you will need to start with the star pattern. So I will leave the link in the description for this star pattern. So what you will do is you will cut out the star pattern, and then you will lie it on your fabric, and you will pin the star pattern onto the fabric so that way it doesn't slide when you're cutting it out. So after you pin the star pattern onto the fabric, you will need to cut around the star pattern, and you will need to do this twice so that way you have 2 pieces of fabric, kind of like 2 pieces of bread on a sandwich. So once you have these 2 pieces of fabric that are cut out and they're shaped like stars, you need to pin them together. Make sure you pin the bad side facing outwards and the good side facing inwards, so that way whenever you flip it inside out, the good side will be on the outside. So once you pin the bad side on the outside and the good side on the inside, then you will need to sew around the edge, except for you need to leave a 2 to 3 inch hole roughly, so that way we can flip it inside out and then put stuffing into it. So after you turn it inside out, you can put stuffing into it. So like I said earlier, you can put cotton. I put crinkly plastic into it. I really like the crinkly plastic. I think it's like a good sensory thing because it has a little bit of a texture to it, and it has sound. So once you stuff it as full as possible with the cotton or the plastic, then you need to sew the 2 to 3 inch hole shut, and then yes, you will probably be able to see the little bit that you sewed shut, but it is typically a very small hole, so it will not matter much. So after you sew the star shut, then you need to work on the pocket. So for the pocket, I usually base the size of the pocket like off the size of the star, so that way it's more like, I guess, perfectly fits. So that way it like fits perfectly in the pocket. So I typically did rectangular pockets. You can do square pockets, or if you can do another shape, then you can do that. But what you will need to do is you will need to pin the pocket down on 3 sides, but only 3 sides. You need to leave the top part open, obviously, so that way we can actually have a pocket. So after you pin the 3 sides down, you'll need to sew all along the edge here, and then don't forget to backstitch so it doesn't fall off. After you have sewn the pocket on, the last part that you'll need to do is you'll need to take this ribbon so that way it doesn't get lost. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to start by sewing it right here on the back. You can attach it on to one of the points. That's what I found was easiest, just because this is super stuffed full of plastic, so it wouldn't be exactly very easy to sew through. So once you sew right here, just a piece of string on it. Once you sew right here, then you need to sew the other side on the inside of the pocket. So like I would pull this piece of fabric down, and then I would sew like right here. Don't forget to backstitch on that so it doesn't fall off. So that way the star will never ever get lost. For the ribbon, you can make it as kind of as long as you want. I made mine typically 1 to 2 feet long. You don't want it too long, I guess, just so like it's not super floppy or crazy long, and it's not like too looped like this. We wouldn't want super long ones, I guess. So 1 to 2 feet of ribbon is probably good. So then you have your star. So the final and last piece of this mat is this sliding ribbon. I'm not really entirely sure what to call it, But for this sliding ribbon, you will need to use the cork and the plastic straw. So to start with, you will need to cut the cork into 3 individual pieces. So I typically used a knife for this just because like it's really hard to cut with a cork with scissors. Once you cut it into 3 pieces, you need to drill a hole in the center so that way you can like slide it onto the ribbon. And you will need to do this for all 3 pieces of the cork. And then you will take your plastic straw, and you can cut your plastic straw into a couple different pieces. I only have 2 pieces of plastic straw on this one. I know on some of my other mats I have like 3 or 4 pieces of plastic straw. It's just up to you really how much you want to put on this ribbon. So for the actual ribbon part, I did about 10 or so inches of ribbon. So you can also do string. I didn't have any string at the time, and I couldn't get any because of the pandemic, so I just used ribbon. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to stitch down one of the sides and like leave the other side open, kind of like this one. So like, see how it's only tied down on one side? That's because you need to be able to slide on the corks and stuff. And then after you slide on all the corks, then you would tack this part down and you would sew just along the edge here. Whenever you sew it, you need to make sure you have like, it needs to be a little loose, like this kind of, see how it's kind of like a U shape? Don't make it like completely taut, because like if it's completely taut, then it'll be really, really hard for anyone to move these pieces. So you need to make sure like it's a little loose. So there you go, that's your Gold Award mat. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments and I'll respond as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.